In the winter of 1777, a young man stands barefoot in the snow at Valley Forge, and the country he is fighting for owes him $6.67. That is his pay for a whole month, $6.67. And he has not seen a coin of it since summer. His name does not matter to the men who keep the books. On their ledger, he is one line, private, $6 2/3 a month. $6 in a good year could buy a pair of shoes. He does not have shoes. He wrapped his feet in a shirt 3 weeks ago. But this is not really a story about a war. It is a story about a ladder and the men who climbed it while he starved at the bottom. Because at every rank of the new American army, there was a number. And behind every number, there was a life or the end of one. Today, we climb it, rung by rung. The private, the sergeant, the captain, the colonel, the general. And then we open the books on who actually got rich. This is Rank and Ledger. In today's episode, George Washington's New America, rank by rank. What each man was promised, what he was actually paid, and who walked away with the money. We begin at the very bottom in the snow where the pay was smallest and the promises were largest. One thing before we climb. If you want to see who really gets paid in worlds like this one, armies, empires, new republics, subscribe now and leave a like. It genuinely decides whether this channel survives. You are 19 years old. You have never been more than a day's walk from your father's farm. Then a man on a barrel reads out a promise. $6 2/3 every month, he says. A new coat, a musket, and when the war is won, land of your own. To a boy who owns nothing, it sounds like a fortune. That promise of land was real, and it was written down. 100 acres for a private who served to the very end of the war. To a landless farm boy, 100 acres was not wages. It was a whole different life. But there was a catch buried in the promise. You had to survive to the end of the war to collect it. And at $6 a month in the snow, the end of the war was very far away. So you make your mark on the muster roll. You cannot write your name, so you draw a small cross beside it. That cross is now the Army's property. The coat comes late and does not fit. The musket is older than you are. And the $6 a month, you will learn, is not really $6 at all. Across the battle lines, the enemy was paid better, and paid in silver. A British regular earned little too, but it was real coin, and it arrived. The hired Hessian soldiers were paid in hard money their own princes had sold them for. The men fighting for liberty were paid the worst of anyone on the field. That is the bitter joke at the bottom of this ladder. Because the army pays him in Continental dollars. Paper money, printed by a Congress with no gold behind it, and more of it printed every single month. In 1776, that paper is almost worth its face. 2 years later, it takes 5 paper dollars to buy $1 of silver. By 1781, it takes over 200. There is an expression born in these years, not worth a Continental. It means worth nothing at all. And that is what fills the private's pay envelope. And what little he is owed, the camp itself takes back. Sutlers, the merchants who trail every army, sell him tobacco, thread, a mouthful of rum, at prices set for men with nowhere else to buy. By 1780, the paper has fallen so far that a single pair of shoes can cost 100 Continental dollars or more. A month's wage would not buy the laces, and even that worthless paper often does not come. In 1777, short of money, Congress simply stops paying the soldiers regularly at all. So, what does the private actually live on? Not money. On a daily ration, when it arrives, a pound of beef, a pound of bread, sometimes a cup of rum. At Valley Forge, even that fails. The men boil their shoes for the leather. They eat something they call Firecake, just flour and water baked on a hot stone. That winter, without a single battle, roughly 1 in 6 of them dies. Of cold, of hunger, of fever in the crowded huts. For $6 a month, that never comes. By the end of 1776, so many men were walking home that Washington begged for hard cash to hold the army together. 10 silver dollars paid on the spot to any man who would stay 6 more weeks. 10 real dollars when a month's wage was worthless paper. That is how close the whole revolution came to simply dissolving in the cold over money. Here is your first question, and I want you to answer it in the comments. Would you have stayed unpaid and starving for a promise of land you might never live to claim? Tell me below. Now we climb one rung. To the man who sleeps in the same freezing hut, eats the same fire cake, and is paid barely $1 more to hold the whole thing together. The sergeant is not an officer. He is a private who survived long enough to be trusted. His pay is about $8 a month. $1 and change above the men he commands. For that extra dollar, he is awake before the men and asleep after them. He counts them at dawn. He counts them again at night. And in battle, he counts who is missing. He is the man who drills farm boys into soldiers, who teaches them to stand in a line while other men shoot at them, which is the hardest thing a human being can be asked to do. For that, he is paid $1 a month more than the boys he might have to watch die. $1 to be the difference between a mob and an army. When the pay does not come, it is the sergeant the men blame first, because he is the face they can reach. The generals are far away. He is right there. The sergeant also carries the paperwork the men cannot read. He knows before they do when the pay chest is empty again, and he has to stand in front of them at dawn anyway and give the orders. In January of 1781, the pressure finally breaks. The soldiers of the Pennsylvania line, unpaid for a year, take up their muskets and march, not at the enemy, but on Congress itself. They are not traitors. They simply want to be paid what they were promised. It takes a negotiation to calm them, and many are quietly let go. The message is clear. The bottom of the ladder is starting to crack. Now the ladder changes. Above the sergeant, the air gets warmer, the food gets better, and for the first time, the pay is worth stealing. The captain commands a company, perhaps 100 men, and here, the numbers finally jump. He earns $20 a month in 1776, 3 times a private's pay. And unlike the private's pay, the captain's is raised. By 1778, a captain earns $40 a month, while the private below him is still stuck at $6.67. The captain sleeps in a tent, not a hut. He has a servant, often a soldier, assigned to him. He eats what his men eat, but more of it, and warmer. But the captain has a temptation the private never gets. He often controls the company's money and supplies. He draws pay and rations for 100 men, and the army has no way to check if all 100 are real. So some captains keep dead men on the roll. A soldier dies of fever, but his name lives on, drawing pay every month, straight into the captain's pocket. The books call it a full company. The graves say otherwise. It is the oldest trick in any army. The men at the bottom become numbers, and numbers can be quietly turned into coins by the man who holds the pen. And yet, by 1778, Washington had a problem no enemy could cause. His own officers were quitting, not from fear but from poverty. A captain with a family could not feed them on pay that bought nothing. So many resigned that the army was bleeding its own leaders. To stop it, Congress made a promise it had no money to keep. Serve to the end and receive half your pay for life. Here is your second question for the comments. If you were that captain cold, unpaid for months yourself, would you have taken the dead men's pay? Be honest. Tell me below. Now we climb into the officer class proper, to the colonel, who rides where the private walks and who is paid enough to build a life on it. A colonel commands a whole regiment, hundreds of men. He earns $50 a month in 1776 and $75 by 1778. That is more than 10 times a private's pay. But his real wealth is not the salary. It is what the rank lets him become. Colonels are gentlemen. Many were wealthy before the war, and rank protects that wealth. And the colonel's reward at the end was not 100 acres. It was 500. Rank multiplied everything at once: the monthly pay, the pension, and the land waiting after the war. He rides a horse the army feeds. He has multiple servants. He dines on china carried in a wagon. When the men eat Firecake, the colonel's table has meat, bread, and wine. And the colonel plays a longer game than pay. He is promised half of his salary for life as a pension when the war ends. For a gentleman, that is the real prize. A lifetime income for surviving. That promise, half pay for life, will become the fuse for the most dangerous moment in the whole story. Because the officers believe it, and the new nation cannot pay it. Now we reach the very top of the fighting ladder, the general. And here the story turns strange, because the highest paid rank of all was held by a man who refused to be paid. A brigadier general earned $125 a month, a major general $166, 25 times what the freezing private at the bottom was promised. And the general's land bounty was 1,100 acres, 11 times the private's 100. The ladder did not simply widen the pay. It widened everything that pay could ever become. And then there was the commander-in-chief, George Washington. When Congress offered him a salary of $500 a month, he stood up and refused it. It was a magnificent gesture. "I will take no pay," he said, "only ask that my expenses be covered." The Congress was moved. The public adored him for it. And it was, quietly, the most expensive decision the young country ever agreed to. Because Washington kept an expense account. Every meal, every horse, every bottle of wine, every mile of travel for 8.5 years of war. And he submitted the bill at the end. That bill came to roughly $449,000. Had he simply taken the salary he refused, it would have cost the country a fraction of that. His generosity was real. It was also enormous. The account was not fraud. Washington was scrupulous to the penny. But it recorded everything. Fine wine for his officers' table. Fast horses. On the 4th of July, 1776, it even notes the purchase of a broom. 8.5 years of a general's life, every comfort and every mile, lived entirely at the young country's expense. No salary. And a bill larger than any salary could ever have been. So the man at the top drew no wage and cost more than any wage. And the man at the bottom was promised a wage and was paid almost nothing. That is the shape of the ladder. Now let us see who actually got rich. Because the twist of this whole story is that the richest men in it never fired a shot. Remember the private's back pay? The money he was owed but never got? When the war finally ends, Congress admits the debt. It cannot pay in coin, so it hands each soldier paper notes promising future money, a promise of money later from a government that had already broken every promise of money before. To a starving veteran with no shoes and a farm going to ruin, later, that might as well be never. So, the speculators come, well-dressed men with real silver in their pockets. They offer the veterans coins today for the paper notes at pennies on the dollar. Take 10 now or wait years for 100 that may never arrive. Desperate men take the coins. They sell their own back pay, their own sacrifice for a fraction of its worth, just to get home and eat. Then, years later, the new federal government makes a decision. It will honor those old notes in full, at face value. And guess who is holding them now? Not the soldiers, the speculators. The officers were caught in the same trap just higher up. Their half pay for life was the fuse that nearly blew at Newburgh. To defuse it, Congress swapped it for full pay for 5 years, handed over as interest-bearing paper certificates. Paper again. And like the enlisted men before them, many officers sold that paper cheap to the same speculators, just to clear the debts they had run up staying in the fight. The men who fought sold their notes for a handful of silver. The men who never fought bought those notes cheap and cashed them in full. The soldier's sacrifice became the speculator's fortune, and it nearly ended the country before it began. In 1783, the officers, still owed their pay and their promised pensions, gathered in secret at Newburgh, and some spoke openly of marching on the government. The army that had just won the revolution was about to turn on the republic it created, over money, over back pay. The whole experiment balanced on a knife edge in that room. Then Washington walked in unannounced. He asked to read a letter, and struggling with the small print, he reached for his spectacles and said quietly that he had grown gray and nearly blind in their service. Grown men wept. The revolt collapsed in that instant, not because the money appeared, but because one man reminded them what they had bled for. The pay would come slowly, unfairly, incompletely, but the republic survived. So, here's the final ledger. The private was promised land and a wage, and got worthless paper and a grave. The speculator risked nothing and grew rich on the soldier's signature. And the general at the top took no salary at all and left the largest bill of anyone. In this new America, as in every world we climb, the numbers on the ledger and the truth on the ground were never the same thing. So here is your last question, and it is the one that matters most. In a country built on liberty and equality, was it right that the men who fought were paid the least and cheated the worst? Tell me below. I read every comment. If this story held you, do the 2 things that keep this channel climbing. Leave a like and subscribe to Rank and Ledger, because next time we open the books on a whole new world and a whole new ladder.